My name is Shaun Sutton and I'm co-founder and chief executive of Teach First NZ, and I set up Teach First NZ with a team of educators about 5 years ago, and we've placed 4 intakes of teachers into schools so far. My background, actually I'll explain what Teach First NZ is first. We're an independent charity that has partnered with schools, the Ministry of Education and the University of Auckland to attract top graduates and early career professionals and really channel their energies into a 2-year commitment to teach in low decile secondary schools, and then over the long term developing them as a community of alumni leaders who have been through the program, have been part of our leadership development strand and remain engaged with education over the long term no matter what they end up doing, whether that be in schools or in leadership positions within schools or in education policy or wider education research perhaps. And my background is I'm a Kiwi originally but spent many years living overseas, about 5 years living in England. I was working in the private sector over there initially, and I had considered teaching once or twice as I went through university myself, but to be honest I'd looked at traditional pathways into teacher training and they just didn't appeal to me for a number of reasons. However, when I saw Teach First I knew this was the program for me, and I was lucky enough to get accepted onto the program as a participant in London and taught for 2 years in an equivalent of a Decile 1 school in London. That was a really personal experience for me, and I could see firsthand the impact that teachers have in terms of literally changing the life trajectories of kids living in poverty, and also looking at the research that's come out about Teach First in the UK. All of that motivated me to return home to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I was thinking to myself, why don't we have something like this in New Zealand? We have a growing spirit of service of people like you coming out of university, and we have huge levels of educational inequality in New Zealand. We know how it can be solved. It's not rocket science. Why haven't we set up something like this in New Zealand? And that really motivated me to set up Teach First NZ. So my 3 ideas are based on the research around the world about education, which unequivocally states that the most powerful factor in reducing educational inequality is the quality of the teacher at the front of the room. It's not necessarily about the class size or how many kids are in the class. It's not about the quality of the school buildings. Sure, those factors may have some influence, but by far the factor that has the most level of influence on reducing educational inequality is the quality of the teacher at the front of the classroom and also the quality of the leadership in the school. And that's what Teach First NZ is about. So my 3 ideas, number 1 is creating multiple pathways into the teaching profession. In New Zealand, historically, there's pretty much just been one way to train as a teacher in recent times. Through the traditional pathway, get your degree and then you do a 1-year graduate diploma in teaching, which is a great way for many people, and we have thousands and thousands of really fantastic teachers doing awesome work in many schools across New Zealand. But the most successful school systems around the world show that just as we teach kids in the classroom differently according to their learning style, so too do adults learn differently. And by creating different pathways into teaching, looking to attract those like me who hadn't necessarily considered teaching is a great way to bring in top graduates and increase the status of teaching as a profession, which unfortunately has a relatively low status in New Zealand at the moment. And that's what Teach First NZ has tried to set about, creating a new pathway into teaching. Number 2 is developing better career progression or more clearer career progression steps in schools. We all know that we don't go into education for the money, but there are other rewards. And if we can make teaching an attractive career option in terms of once you get into schools, there are options for progression, leadership opportunities, professional development in schools, that will make it even more attractive to New Zealand's top graduates to enter teaching as a first choice. Just as law and medicine are really competitive to get into in New Zealand, we need to be working to making teaching just as competitive as it is to become a lawyer or a doctor. And other countries overseas have managed to achieve that. Let's work to making that happen in New Zealand. Number 3 is leadership, focusing on leadership. As I mentioned before, leadership Principalship in schools is just so critical at driving high impact, high achievement, high aspiration in the classroom. But we know also from the research that the same qualities that make effective leaders at a sort of a principal level or a leader outside of education level are the same qualities that make effective teachers at the classroom level. Setting a vision for their students, planning purposefully, engaging families and whānau, and really kind of working towards that vision. Those are the same qualities that we know make great teachers. So number one, multiple pathways into the teaching profession, career progression opportunities once you're in schools, and focusing on leadership development at all levels. Those are the three ways that I believe we should be focusing on to reduce educational inequality. And we all know, as we've heard from the fantastic previous speaker, that education is the key answer to tackling poverty in New Zealand. Thanks very much.